obvious that certain traditions that weren't under this umbrella of a specific tradition, they didn't have this shame with them because it wasn't put on them by a higher authority and told to be, this is the way things are, no questions asked. Personally, I've done many classes, nude drawing classes, where I am on stage for art students, and it's a great experience to be the center of attention that is not in a sexual way. If anyone has an issue with bearing themselves and feeling that people are going to be tugging at their energy because they're nude, and being nude is such an issue in our culture, I'd encourage you to sign up for a drawing class as a model, and you, over several sessions, you get more and more comfortable with being up there and being the center of attention, not in terms of being seen naked as a sexual thing, but being naked as an artistic thing and a beautiful thing. And that is very much in line with that idea of a Greek statue is a beautiful thing to see. It's the human body. It's the church that came along and put plastered leaves over marble granite statues, and later on they would chip away these crumbly leaves to bring the statue back to its full form. And this brings us to the next topic of sexual repression, which has been underlying all of these things I've been talking about. Sexual repression is rampant in our society. I've discussed one way of dealing with sexual attraction without repressing it, with the idea that we feel these things in everyday interactions, and we can circulate these feelings and not engage with them, but just observe them from a meditative type perspective, and be thankful that our bodies can give us these rush of wonderful feeling chemicals, yet we don't feel trapped and controlled by those lower urges, because you could say our Creator or God has given us the choice of free will. So in that respect, we can let things unfold without trying to return that incoming energy or to engage in that feelings that are radiating outwards from us, and we can just feel the result of the chemicals in our body that are healing. It's quite well known that religion across the board is very repressive sexuality from a young age in children, and this takes in the form of circumcision in boys. In some instances, which is much more horrific, is the circumcision of girls, where they literally cut off the clitoris in young girls. This is specifically in Africa, but I believe it takes place in some Islamic cultures and perhaps in other areas of the world, I'm not sure. But any form of genital mutilation is not correct in any way, and has not been proven in any way to be beneficial for the health. The motivation behind this type of sexual repression in women is so that they're faithful to their husbands because they've lost the ability to feel pleasure, and instead of a culture being able to correct whatever imbalances caught in their relationship dynamics so that a couple can choose to be faithful, instead they mutilate women at a young age so that they're faithful to their husbands because they aren't aware that their bodies can bring them this pleasure, and so they don't sleep with other men. And specifically in men, when they've been circumcised, it's a known fact that the, I believe it's called the frenulum, that little bit of skin that attaches from the urethra, below the urethra to the foreskin on the bottom side of the penis, that, when it's been cut away with the foreskin, actually allows for rape to occur, because a man that has not been circumcised can't rape someone, or it's very difficult for them to rape someone because it's so painful when that foreskin gets pulled back in a forcible way and pulls on this little bit of skin that the church was very much aware of and decided to bring in this idea of circumcision to give men that power over women. So continuing on with this sexual repression in children brought on to us by religions and various traditions, many children, well, we'll talk about both genders. Firstly, males, if they're taught that sexuality is this taboo thing at a young age, they're going to grow up experiencing their own self-pleasure, what we might call masturbation. However, the word masturbation has a negative connotation around it that comes from the word, it's basically meaning defiling oneself, so I'm going to not use the word masturbation, even though that's what I'm talking about, because that word has been created by the church. But if we talk about self-pleasure, it's much more easy to talk about without carrying on this negative connotation. But self-pleasure as a young child. It's a very well-known fact that males get erections in the womb, they get erections as babies, they get erections through their whole life if their health maintains it. They're going to continue it in later life too, if they can maintain their hormonal and circulatory health and don't become impotent. But basically, the male gender is a very sexual being, and as a child, if it's taught to repress that, they're going to feel hurried in their personal practice of self-pleasure. They're going to be worried, they're going to be caught, and thus they develop these ingrained habits of doing it quickly. And you look at any research from a sexual psychology standpoint, and men that have premature ejaculation problems have repressed sexuality from when they were a child. They were masturbating or self-pleasuring in a very hurried manner, and so they can't last during sex. They can't perform. They can't have a pleasurable experience with their partner. And on the flip side, if we talk about females, if they're repressed from a young age, as they are in basically every religion across the board in some form or another, they develop, instead of hyper excitation of their pleasure centers, that are going to develop a dulling of their sexual center, and this is going to develop all sorts of knots in the muscular walls of the vulva. There's all sorts of therapies that are available now, and there's literally, just like you can get a massage and work out knots in your back or any part of your body, wherever there's muscle tissue, you can get these like calcified knots that become more and more hard over time and reduce blood flow, reduce pleasure through any area of the body. And my personal experience with partners has been, the more that those blockages from past sexual experiences, past childhood, personal sexual experiences are released, the more loving and pleasurable the interactions with your partner can become. And as a final note, I'd just like us to speak about female menstruation and the comments that were made in regards to, and this is made in various religions, that female menstruation is unclean. Quite shocking to hear. I know many women are very shocked about these comments on the page, and if that's your personal feeling, that's fine. And this was a concern in the past, for sure, when there were sanitary problems, when women would be on their period. In the medieval ages, for instance, they didn't have tampons. I'm not saying that tampons are a good thing, but they didn't have tampons, they didn't have running water, they didn't have methods of working with the body in the way we do now. And women would invariably, at that period of time, have trace amounts of blood, perhaps on their hands, perhaps on other parts of their bodies, and that would be the motivation for a religious doctrine to take on this idea that women are unclean during that time of the month. And so they're not touched by their relatives for 7 days. They're not touched by society for 7 days. But I think we've, as a society, come far enough that we can acknowledge that this is no longer serving us. And if you choose to hold on to these old, outdated traditions that have no basis in actual health, unless you can come up with a valid reason, I'd love to hear it. I'm completely open to changing my perception of this. However, there's no scientific basis for this, so don't profess it as a health issue when that's going on, because actually women do enjoy being held or touched in that time of month. There's actually processes going in their body that encourage massages and contact to help them get through those things. And if they personally feel not to be touched, that's another thing. And again, if you choose not to touch a partner, wife, etc., when she's on her period, that's one thing, but to claim that it's unhealthy to is unbased. And we now have sanitation, we do have remarkable technologies to help us in many ways deal with these things that go on, not just with menstruation, but with everything I've talked here. And I think we've grown as a human race to the point where we can look at these things with a critical eye and not be put into this place of feeling like we have to be obligated to follow a specific path because it's stated in this way, and recognize that things change, the only constant is change. There is nothing static or stationary, and even that statement I just made is subject to change. And with that, I wish all of you watching this well. Think critically, think logically, use your intuition, of course, but do use critical judgment. And my best to anyone that feels differently about these things that I've spoken about. This is just to bring these issues forward because I think it's very important that the other side is seen on these issues. And with that, take care and embrace life without limits.